The part of me that belonged to my old life was already gone before I understood it had left. I know that now. I didn't know it in the hallway, standing in blood-stained gloves, listening to a man who hadn't drawn breath in 4 centuries try to hold himself together without making a sound. What I knew was that his grief was going to cost someone their life.
So I said what I said.
Quietly, in the language I only use when no one is supposed to hear. He heard it. And when he turned, slowly, the way something ancient turns when it has decided you are worth the effort, I understood that careful women do not stay careful forever. Some of us were always going to end up here. If you've ever been the steady one, the one who holds everything together while the world comes apart, and still found yourself undone by something you cannot name, you're in the right place. Stay with me. They called me at 6:43 on a Sunday morning. I remember the time because I had been awake since 4, sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee and a surgical journal I wasn't reading, and when the phone rang I was almost relieved.
Dover General needed me in.
2 GSW arrivals, critical, both requiring immediate intervention. The attending on call had one in the air, and no second pair of hands qualified for what was coming through those doors. I was there in 11 minutes. The ER bay smelled the way it always does after a trauma activation. Antiseptic laid over something raw, something the cleaning crews never quite reach. My team was already moving when I pushed through. Nurse Teddy Rourke met me at the scrub station with a look that told me everything before he opened his mouth.
2 females, he said.
First one's a head wound, fragment lodged posterior temporal lobe, 3 millimeters from the basilar artery. Second is cardiac, bullet tracking close to the right ventricle. We've got maybe 40 minutes on the cardiac before. I heard you. I was already gloving. Who's running the neuro? Dr. Vass. She's asking if you'll take the cardiac. Tell her I have it. That was the last moment of the morning that felt ordinary. I did not see him immediately. The surgical wing at Dover General runs in a long corridor off the main trauma bay, level 4, and the family waiting area is tucked behind a frosted glass partition at the far end, out of sight by design.
We don't need families in our line.
We need quiet and controlled light, and the particular quality of focused silence that good surgical teams build together over years. What I did not need, 40 minutes into closing on a bullet that had no business being where it was the low-frequency pressure that began moving through the, or like a change in weather.
It wasn't sound, exactly.
More like the moment before sound. The way the air in a room shifts when something very large and very still decides to move. The monitors didn't alarm. Nothing technically changed. But my scrub tech, Priya, glanced up from the field without meaning to, and I felt my own concentration narrow by a degree I could not afford. I finished. The bullet came free clean. I closed without incident. Karina, I would learn her name later, made it through with her brain intact. I found the source of the disturbance in the corridor outside the second OR. He was standing with his back to the observation window, cream suit immaculate in the flat fluorescent light, silver-white hair swept back from a face that had no softness in it and no apology for the lack. He was not pacing. Men like him, and I had never seen a man like him, but I recognized the category immediately the way you recognize a species from its posture alone. Do not pace. He was simply present in the way a load-bearing wall is present. The space organized itself around him. He was staring at the OR doors. Behind those doors, Ren was still open on the table. My second-year resident, Dr. Callum Ife, had the lead and was doing well. I had checked the monitor feed twice from the corridor. She was stable.
She was going to be fine.
He did not know that yet. I watched him for 3 seconds, the rigid set of his jaw, the way his hands were clasped in front of him with a precision that looked less like patience and more like the last alternative to something he had decided not to do, and I understood with the clinical detachment I have spent a decade cultivating that this man was afraid. Not the ordinary kind. The kind that lives below fear, in the place where it has been for so long it has become structural. He was losing her in his mind. Over and over in real time he was losing her. And it was affecting my hospital. I pulled off my surgical cap and walked to the scrub sink at the corridor's end, running the water cold the way I always do after a long close. My hands were steady. They are always steady. It is the one thing I have never had to work for. Behind me, That pressure built another degree. I could feel it in the back of my teeth. I turned off the tap, reached for the paper towels, and under my breath, very quietly in the Sicilian my mother only spoke inside our house, in the language I used the way other people use locked rooms, I said what I said. Stay facenu kaiu danu ca bene. You are doing more harm than good. The pressure stopped. Not faded.
Stopped.
Like a door closing. The corridor went so quiet I could hear the ventilation system 2 floors up. I kept my eyes on my hands.
Kept drying.
Finished one finger at a time the way my mother taught me, though she was teaching me about dish soap and not about moments like this one. Then, from directly behind me, close enough that I registered the temperature drop before I registered the voice, came something low and precise and absolutely without inflection. Say that again. A pause. But looking at me. I dropped the paper towel in the bin. Turned around. He was closer than he had any right to be for a man I hadn't heard move. Up close, his eyes were the color of deep water in January, not quite any color, and very still, and very old. The grief I had read from across the corridor was still there, but it had company now. Something else had moved in alongside it. Attention. The full, undivided kind. The kind that does not multitask. I held his gaze. Your presence is interfering with this floor's equipment. My voice came out level. I was proud of that. I need you to move to the family suite on level 2 until I come to find you. He looked at me for a long moment. Not through me. At me.
She's alive, I said.
It wasn't a concession. It was clinical information. Both of them are. I will come to you when I can release you a fuller report. Something moved across his face that I didn't have a name for. You understood what I said, I added.
I hadn't meant to. It came out anyway.
My mother was from Palermo. His voice had not changed register. Still low. Still precise. And you are not afraid of me. It wasn't a question. I picked up the chart Teddy had left on the counter beside me and turned toward the nurse's station. I'll be up in 20 minutes. I made it 4 steps before he spoke again, quieter this time, almost to himself, though I understood it was entirely for me. Interesting. I did not look back. I told myself that was a choice. 20 minutes became 40. That is the thing no one tells you about surgery. The closing takes as long as it takes, and the clock you set for yourself before you go in is always optimistic. By the time I had signed off on Ren's post-op notes and checked Karina's neuro panel for the 3rd time, the corridor outside the recovery suite had gone quiet in the particular way hospital corridors go quiet after midnight. The cleaning crew had passed through. The day shift noise had long since drained away. What remained was the low hum of equipment and the occasional soft footfall of the overnight nurses, and under all of it, a stillness that Dover General only finds when the worst is over. I told myself I was going to check on Ren once.
Clinically.
Then go home. I told myself that while I was already walking toward her room. She was smaller than I expected. I don't know what I had imagined. Some approximation of her father, perhaps that same quality of compressed stillness. What I found was a child. 8, maybe 9 by the look of her, though I already understood that appearances in this situation were not a reliable metric. She lay in the center of the recovery bed with the particular limpness of deep sedation, one arm outside the blanket, the monitoring leads kneed against her chest where my resident had placed them with more care than strictly required. The room smelled of antiseptic and, faintly, of something older, like rain on stone, like a house that has been kept very clean for a very long time. I checked her chart, checked the drain, checked the monitor reading against what I already knew it would say, because I had looked at it from the nurse's station, not 6 minutes ago. She was stable. She was going to be fine. I stayed anyway. I pulled the visitor's chair to the side of the bed, not the foot, the side, which is where you sit when you are not just checking, when you have admitted to yourself that you are keeping watch, and I sat down. The vinyl creaked. Ren did not stir. I watched her breathe. I did not hear him arrive. I don't think he made a sound. One moment the doorway was empty, and then it held him, that cream suit somehow still immaculate, his hands at his sides now rather than clasped, which felt like a change I didn't have the context to read. He stood at the threshold and looked at his daughter with an expression that I had no business seeing. Raw is the wrong word. It was more specific than raw. It was the face of someone who has survived so many losses that relief no longer arrives clean. It comes in already mixed with the memory of every time it didn't come at all.
He didn't speak.
I didn't stand. After a moment, he crossed the room, took the chair on the opposite side of the bed, and sat. No announcement. No request for permission. Just the quiet certainty of a man who had decided where he was going to be. We sat on either side of her, and the monitors kept their slow rhythm, and neither of us said anything. I should have left. I want to be clear about that. I was aware, with the part of my mind that has always functioned as a kind of internal auditor, that leaving was the correct professional action. I had patients on 2 other floors. I had notes to finish. I had a life on the other side of those doors that had been waiting patiently all day for me to come back to it. I sat there and watched a child breathe, and I did not move. Ren stirred some time after that. Not fully, just the small restless shift of someone rising through sedation, the limbs testing their own weight before consciousness arrives to supervise them. Her eyes opened partway.
Closed.
Opened again. They found me first. I don't know why. Her father was 3 feet away. She turned her head on the pillow, and those eyes, dark, old in a way that had nothing to do with illness, found my face and stayed there. She lifted her hand. I looked at it for a moment. The back of my mind was composing a reasonable response, something about maintaining appropriate clinical distance, about the particular care required when building expectations in pediatric post-surgical patients. I took her hand. It was cool. Not cold. Cool, the way a room gets cool when the heat has been off long enough to be noticeable. Her fingers closed around mine with a certainty that had no grogginess in it, and she looked at me the way children look at things they have already made their minds up about. Then her eyes moved to her father. She studied him for a long moment, taking inventory, I understood, checking him the way he had been checking those or doors for hours. Satisfied with what she found, her eyes closed again. She did not let go of my hand. I looked up.
He was watching me.
Not the way he had watched me in the corridor, not that full, assessing attention I had felt like a change in air pressure. This was different. Quieter. The calculation I had read in him from the first moment was gone, or not gone, but set aside. What was underneath, it was something I recognized without wanting to. He was not deciding anything. He had decided. I didn't know what he had decided. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that with some conviction. Ren's hand stayed warm in mine by degrees, her body remembering its own temperature now that the sedation was lifting its heaviest weight. The monitor above her head kept its patient count. I did not look away from him immediately. That was the part one couldn't account for later. Not the staying, not even the hand, but those 4 seconds where I held his gaze across his daughter's bed and did not reach for any of my usual exits. Then I looked back at Ren. He looked back at Ren. The room held the 3 of us in its quiet, and the overnight corridor moved past outside, and nobody came in to ask why the chief of surgery was still here 2 hours after her last chart was signed. Nobody left either. 3 days passed in the way that days pass when you are pretending nothing has changed. I did my rounds. I signed my charts. I attended the Tuesday mortality review and sat at the head of the conference table and said the right things in the right order. Priya caught me staring at the wall above the coffee machine for 45 seconds on Wednesday morning and didn't mention it, which meant she had noticed enough to be careful. Teddy brought me a sandwich I didn't ask for on Thursday afternoon and set it on my desk without comment. My staff had learned, over 3 years, to read the particular quality of my stillness. They were reading it now. What I could not have explained to any of them was what I was actually doing. I was waiting. And I did not know what I was waiting for, which was the part that kept waking me at 4 in the morning with my hand pressed flat against the mattress like I was checking that the floor was still there. Harriet came to the hospital each day during those 3 days. He sat with Karina in the mornings and with Ren in the afternoons, and he did not seek me out, and I did not seek him. We passed each other twice in the corridor, once near the elevator bank, once outside the pharmacy window, and both times he inclined his head in a way that was not quite a nod, and I kept walking, and that was all. There was a quality to those non-encounters that I recognized from surgical work, the deliberate stillness of someone managing a very precise amount of pressure. Too much and things rupture. Too little and nothing heals. I told myself I appreciated the professionalism. I checked the recovery suite monitor feed from my office 3 times on Thursday. Ren was fine. She had been fine since Tuesday. I knew that. He came to me at 2 in the morning on Friday. Not to my home, to the hospital, which I had not left. I had a small office on level 3 with a couch I used more than I had ever planned to when I accepted the position, and I was sitting on it with my shoes off and a cold cup of tea going soft on the desk when the knock came. 2 knocks. Measured. Not loud. I knew before I opened the door. He was carrying a manila folder. Nothing else, no briefcase, no pretense of a casual visit. He was dressed in charcoal this time, the first time I had seen him in anything other than that cream, and the difference registered in some part of me that I chose not to examine. "There is something you need to see," he said. I debated whether to come. "You came." "Yes." I stepped back from the door. He sat across from me at the small table I use for patient-family consultations, the one with the box of tissues in the corner that I always move to the shelf before anyone sits down because I find it presumptuous. I moved it to the shelf, now out of habit. He set the folder on the table between us and placed his hand flat on top of it, not opening it. "I want to tell you what is inside before you read it," he said. "Not because I think you cannot manage the information, because you deserve to know what you are about to look at." I looked at the folder, then at him. "Tell me." "The men who were contracted for the shooting, the ones who carried it out on the ground, human contractors, not the principals who ordered it, we have identified them. We have had them for 2 days. He paused. The pause was not for effect. It was the pause of someone who has chosen their words and is now making sure they are the right ones. "Their names are Oliver and Alan Swanson." The room did not change. The monitor hum continued. The tissue box sat on its shelf. I reached across the table and opened the folder myself. There were photographs. There were documents. There was a printed contract, 2 pages, with signatures at the bottom of each. I saw Oliver's handwriting before I read the name. I would know it anywhere, that particular way he makes his 7s with a horizontal slash through the middle that he picked up from a European math teacher in 8th grade and never unlearn it, that he used on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the lease agreement I co-signed for him 6 years ago when his credit wasn't good enough to do it alone. The 7 in the contract date. I stared at it. The page did not move. My hands did not move. The folder sat open under the flat fluorescent light of my consulting room, and the 7 sat there in Oliver's particular hand, and I understood, with a completeness that left no room for negotiation, that the thing I was looking at was real. I closed the folder. I set both palms on top of it. The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the corridor outside, a cart wheeled past. An overnight porter, probably making the rounds that happen in hospitals at hours when most people don't know hospitals are still fully operational, still breathing, still holding the line. The sound came and went, and the quiet returned, and I sat inside it and did not reach for any of the things I normally reach for, not the clinical detachment, not the forward momentum, not the next correct action. I just sat there. Harriet did not speak. He did not offer anything. He moved his hand across the table, not to cover mine, not to reach for me, just forward. Set it down in the space between us. Close. Not touching. I looked at his hand, then at the folder, then at the wall above his head, where a laminated evacuation map had been slightly crooked for 8 months and nobody had fixed it. "How long have they been with you?"
My voice came out even.
I was surprised by that. "Since Tuesday evening." 3 days. He had known for 3 days, and he had waited until he could come to me directly, at an hour when no one else was in the building, with the folder in his hands and no opening before the fact. He had managed the information the way you manage something that belongs to someone else, carefully, until you can return it to them properly. I did not have a category for that. I filed it somewhere unresolved and moved on. Where are they now? Not, are they safe? Not, what will happen to them? Where are they? Harriet looked at me for a moment, reading the question the way it was actually asked. "Secure," he said. "Unharmed. For now, that is all I can promise."
For now.
I nodded once, pulled the folder toward me, straightened its edges against the table, the way I straighten things when my hands need to be doing something my mind has already moved past. His hand stayed where it was. That small open space between us, neither offered nor withdrawn. I did not move mine away from it. I went home in the early morning, when the sky over Dover was still the color of a bruise fading. I had not been home in 4 days. The apartment on Luckerman Street was exactly as I had left it, the surgical journal open on the kitchen table, the coffee cup rinsed but not put away, the throw blanket on the couch folded in the particular thirds that mean I did it quickly, that I was already thinking about something else when I did it. Everything in its place. Everything waiting. I stood in the doorway for longer than I needed to. The silence in there had a specific texture I had not noticed before, not the silence of a peaceful room, but the silence of a room that has been holding its breath. I had spent 3 years building this apartment into something that looked like enough. The right books on the right shelves. The good knife block my mother sent when I got the chief position, still sharp because I maintain things. A plant by the window that I have kept alive through 2 Delaware winters through sheer disciplined watering. Nothing more romantic than that. I walked in, closed the door behind me, set my bag on the chair. I always set it on. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not the chair. Not the couch. The floor, with my back against the cabinet under the sink and my knees drawn up and my good coat still on because I hadn't gotten that far yet. The tile was cold through my trousers. I registered that and did nothing about it. I kept thinking about Oliver 7. Not the contract. Not what the contract meant, not the legal weight of it, not what came next for either of them, just that 7 with its horizontal slash, that particular piece of him, I would know anywhere. He was 11 when he learned it. I was 12, already the one who checked his homework, already the one who corrected things. I had tried to break him of it once, told him it looked affected, and he had looked at me with that infuriating ease he has always had, and said it's just a 7. Fell. Relax. Just a 7. I pressed the back of my head against the cabinet door and looked at the ceiling and stayed there. The thing about spending your life being the careful one is that it requires a specific story about why. The story I had always told myself was clean. I had seen what happened when you weren't careful. I had watched Oliver and Alan move through the world like they were owed it, every risk taken, every consequence outrun or charmed away or handed to someone else to carry. I had watched my mother make excuses for them until the excuses ran out and then make new ones. I had decided, young enough that the decision had the quality of a fact rather than a choice, that I would not be that. That I would build something that could not be pulled out from under me by someone else's recklessness. 20 years of that decision. And Oliver's 7 on a contract that put 2 people on my operating tables. My phone rang twice while I was on the floor. I did not look at it. The 3rd time, it was a knock at the door instead. 2 knocks. Measured. I knew them. I did not move immediately. I sat there for a full 10 seconds, which I know because I counted them, because counting is what I do when I am deciding whether to be the version of myself that opens the door or the version that does not. Then I got up because there was never really a question, and that is something I am only beginning to understand about myself. He had come from the hospital, still in the charcoal. He looked at me, at my coat, at the fact that I was clearly still wearing it at 5 in the morning in my own home, and he did not comment on any of it. You didn't answer, he said. I know. I came anyway. I see that. He waited. Not impatiently, Harriet does not do impatience, or if he does I have not seen it, just with that quality of presence he has that makes rooms feel both smaller and more settled than they were before he entered them. I stepped back from the door. He made tea. I did not ask him to. I took my coat off finally and sat at the kitchen table, and he found the kettle by looking at the stove, and the tea by opening 2 wrong cabinets before the right one, and he stood at my counter with his back to me, and did the whole thing with a concentration that struck me as excessive for a process that takes 4 minutes. The tea, when he set it in front of me, was too strong. I had not told him how I take it. He had no way to know. I wrapped both hands around the mug, and did not correct him. He sat across from me. The table between us was small, the kind of table that is really only meant for one person eating alone, and his presence on the other side of it rearranged the proportions of the whole room. You have been the responsible one, he said. Not a question. Not pity. Just the particular tone of someone naming a thing accurately. Since I was 12. That is a long time to carry something that was never yours to carry. I looked at the tea. The surface of it was still moving, tiny tremors from being set down. They made their choices. Yes. I know that. I know you do. The radiator ticked. Outside, a car moved slowly down Luckerman Street, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling in a long pale arc and then gone. I don't know exactly when it came. Not in a wave, nothing so dramatic. More like a seam giving way in something that had been under pressure for a long time. My eyes filled, and I let them. I did not cover my face. I did not apologize. I cried the way you cry when you are too tired to manage it anymore, not for everything at once, but for one specific thing at a time, moving through them. For Oliver, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder on long car rides when we were small. For Alan, who called me every birthday without fail and sang the whole song badly and hung up laughing. For the version of myself that spent 20 years being proof that they were wrong, and who is only now considering that perhaps I was also running from something I did not know how to name. Harriet did not move toward me. He did not speak. He stayed exactly where he was on the other side of that small table, present the way a wall is present, not warm, exactly, but solid, and there, and not going anywhere. At some point the tea went cold. Neither of us moved to fix it. T.S.I. Firmica. My mother's voice, from somewhere I hadn't visited in years. You stop running here. I had always thought she was talking about our family when she said it. I was beginning to think she meant something else entirely. The summons came on a Tuesday, which struck me as an oddly ordinary day for something like this. A single card, cream stock, no letterhead, slipped under my office door sometime between my 6 a.m. rounds and my 7:15 coffee. For lines of text. An address in Old Dover, one of those federal-style buildings on State Street that look like they have always been exactly what they currently appear to be, which I was learning meant they probably weren't.
A time.
And at the bottom, in a script that managed to feel both formal and final, your presence is required, not requested. I read it twice.
Set it on my desk.
Finish my coffee. Then I went home to dress carefully because precision has always been how I prepare for things I do not know how to prepare for. I wore the navy. Not the white coat. This was not a place where the white coat would do the work I needed it to do. The navy blazer I keep for grant presentations and depositions, the one that makes me look like someone who has given testimony before and found the experience unremarkable. Low heels. Hair up. The small gold studs my mother gave me at graduation because she said they made me look like I had come from somewhere worth coming from. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. I was not afraid. That was the true thing, and also the thing that frightened me most, that I had moved, somewhere in the days between Oliver's 7 and this morning, past fear into something quieter and more committed. I recognized the feeling from surgery, the moment the incision is made, and there is nothing left to decide. I picked up my bag and went. Harriet was waiting outside the building.
He did not ask how I was.
I did not offer it. We walked in together, which I had not planned and did not question, and the door was open before either of us reached for it. The chamber was below street level, a room that smelled of old wood and something mineral, like the stone it had been cut from still remembered being ground. 5 chairs at a long table. 5 figures who turned to look at me with the particular attention of people who have been waiting, specifically, for me. 4 men, 1 woman. All of them old in ways that did not register on the surface. The eldest was at the center, slight, white-haired, with hands folded on the table in front of him and eyes that had the quality of still water over great depth. A chair had been placed across from them. I sat in it. Harriet took a position to my left. Not in front, not behind, beside. They asked their questions in order, beginning with the clinical ones. The nature of Karina's injury. The approach I used. The margin between the bullet's resting point and the basilar artery. The decision-making sequence for Wren's cardiac intervention. Why I chose the approach I chose, what the alternatives were, what I ruled out, and on what grounds. I answered everything. Precisely, completely, without softening or elaborating beyond what was accurate. I had given testimony before, insurance reviews, ethics boards, the occasional deposition, and I knew that the performance of confidence is far less effective than its actual presence. I was not performing. The woman at the table watched me the way you watch something you are trying to date, looking for the marks that tell you what it has been through. The clinical questions ended. The room held a silence that had weight in it, the kind that arrives before something changes. Then the eldest spoke. Why did you save them?
Not how. Why?
I had known this question was coming, not because anyone warned me, but because it was the only question that mattered, and rooms like this one do not waste time on anything else once the groundwork is laid. I had turned it over in the days since the summons arrived, examining it from different angles, checking my own answer for cracks the way I check a closure before I step back from the table. There were no cracks. They were on my table, I said. That is the whole of it. The eldest's eyes did not move from my face. You knew, by that point, what they were. I knew one of them was important to someone standing in my corridor. I did not know the rest until after. I paused. It would not have changed anything, even knowing what you know now, the world they come from, the world you have been pulled into. I thought about Ren's cool hand closing around mine in the recovery room, the certainty of it, the absence of negotiation. I thought about Karina's neuro panel, clean and steady, on Thursday morning. I thought about what it means to open someone and hold the most fragile parts of them in your hands and bring them back across. Especially knowing that, I said. The room was quiet for a long time. The eldest looked at the woman to his right. Something passed between them that I was not meant to read and did not try to. Then he looked at Harriet, a long, measuring look that Harriet received without expression. Then back to me. The matter of your brothers will be adjudicated separately, according to the terms applicable to contracted human participants. You are not responsible for their choices. You are not implicated in their actions.
He paused.
You are, however, recognized as a healer who acted without condition. That is not a common thing in any world. He nodded once. That was the verdict. Outside, the afternoon light fell flat and bright on State Street the way Delaware light does in autumn, clear, with no warmth behind it. I stood on the front step and breathed. Harriet came out behind me. He did not say anything immediately. We stood there together on the step, and a woman walked past with a dog, and a delivery truck rumbled down the street, and Dover went about its business with complete indifference to what had just happened below it. You should know, Harriet said, quiet enough that it went no further than me, that what you said in there, about it not changing anything, I believed you. I know you did. A pause. Then, so did they. I nodded, looked at the street. Ren was sitting on the low stone wall at the bottom of the steps. She was not supposed to be there. She had been discharged 2 days ago with strict instructions and a follow-up scheduled for Thursday, and she was 9 years old and had recently had a bullet removed from near her heart, and she was absolutely, unambiguously not supposed to be sitting on a wall outside a tribunal she had no business attending. She looked at me with those old, decided eyes and hopped down from the wall. She crossed to where I stood, reached up, 2 fingers, just 2, pressed lightly against my cheek. The way you touch something to confirm it is real. I covered her small hand with mine. The stone of the step was cold through my shoes. Somewhere behind me Harriet was very still. TSI Firmica. You stop running here. I pressed her hand gently against my face and closed my eyes, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I did not reach for the next thing. I stayed exactly where I was. The morning after arrives the same way all mornings do. The light comes whether you are ready or not. Dover in early October has a particular quality to it. The air cooler than it has any right to be for the hour. The streets quieter than a larger city would allow. Everything carrying the faint, unhurried sense of a place that has seen enough to stop being surprised by things. I walked to the hospital. I do not always walk. It is 20 minutes on foot from Luckerman Street, but that morning I needed the pavement under me. The specific sensation of forward motion earned 1 step at a time. I had not slept much. I was not tired in the way that matters. Something had settled in me overnight, in the hours after Ren's hand against my face, and the drive home in silence, and the long dark stretch of my apartment where I sat on the couch, not the floor this time, the couch, and simply let the day exist behind me without trying to make sense of it yet. Not every true thing needs to be processed immediately. Some of them need to be carried for a while first, held at arm's length until they stop feeling like foreign objects and start feeling like yours. By the time I pushed through Dover General's main entrance and took the stairs to level 3, the white coat was already doing what white coats do, organizing the world back into something I know how to move through. I had rounds. I did them. Karina was sitting up when I came to her room. Fully upright, a cup of something steaming on the tray table, a book open face down on the blanket beside her in the way of someone who has been reading and stopped to think and not yet returned. She was thinner than she had been a week ago, with the particular transparency that comes after significant blood loss, but her eyes were clear and sharp and tracking me from the moment I appeared in the doorway with a quality of attention that reminded me, acutely, of her brother. "You went," she said. Not a question. I did. And the matter is resolved. I checked her chart. Blood pressure steady, drain output minimal, everything progressing as it should. How's the headache? Manageable. She watched me move through the clinical routine with that same steady attention. You're different. I did not look up from the chart. I'm the same.
No.
She said it without argument, just observation. You're the same, but you've stopped pretending the same is enough. I set the chart back in its holder. Looked at her. She picked up her book. The last woman who stood in that room and wasn't afraid, she said, to the page rather than to me, almost conversationally. That was a very long time ago. She did not look up. She did not elaborate. The sentence sat in the room between us like an object set down carefully on a table, not for examination, just for leaving. I did not ask. Some things are offered, not explained. I was learning the difference. I finished rounds at 6:30. The evening shift had settled in. That particular recalibration of energy that happens when the day team hands over and the hospital finds its nighttime rhythm, lower and steadier, the corridors less trafficked, the light from the nursing stations warmer against the dark of the windows. I wrote my last notes at the station on level 4, standing because I always stand when I write notes at the end of a long day, and when I finished I capped my pen and stood there for a moment with my hands flat on the counter and my eyes on the middle distance. I realized, waiting again. The difference was that this time I knew what I was waiting for, and I had stopped pretending I wasn't. He came at 7. I heard him before I saw him. Not footsteps, but that same alteration of atmosphere I had first registered outside 10 days ago, the room becoming more deliberate around itself. I kept writing. Finished the sentence I was on. Set the pen down. He stopped at the edge of the nursing station. Far enough to be unobtrusive. Close enough that when I looked up, there was nothing between us but 12 feet of corridor and the particular quality of attention he has always given me, full and still, and entirely without performance. He was watching me work, not watching me the way you watch someone you are assessing, watching me the way you watch something you have made a decision about and are now simply present with, the decision no longer requiring maintenance. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I picked up the next chart. I finished it, signed it, filed it. Then I looked up again, and this time I did not look away, and after a moment I said what I said, the thing I had said in the hallway 10 days ago that had started all of this. The same words, the same language. Ste facenu kaiu danu ca beni.
But slowly this time.
Almost gently. The way you say something when you are testing whether it still means what it used to mean, or whether it means something else now, something that cannot be said any other way. The corridor was very quiet. He looked at me for one long beat. Then he smiled. Not a small smile, the full thing, with the particular warmth of something that does not come easily and is not offered casually, reaching all the way to those deep-water eyes and changing them entirely. It was the grin of a man who has been waiting a very long time for something and has the restraint not to say so.
Say that again, he said. Low, certain.
A pause. But looking at me. I was already looking. I had been looking, I understood, since the moment in the hallway when I turned around and found him closer than expected and chose not to step back. The language that had created danger between us landed now as something else entirely. Not a weapon, not a mistake, not a private thing exposed. An arrival. The particular kind that doesn't announce itself until you are already standing in it, and then is so obvious you can't imagine how you missed it coming. There are cities that look like nothing is happening in them. Dover is one of those. It is why certain people have always chosen it. The ones who need somewhere old enough to hold what they carry, quiet enough not to ask about it. I am still the chief of surgery at Dover General. I still walk to work when the morning needs to be earned. I still keep the plant alive by the window, disciplined watering, nothing more, and the good knife block on the counter, and the surgical journal on the kitchen table. I am the same. I have stopped pretending the same is enough. There are others like me in this city. Women who thought they knew exactly what they had built, until something they could not account for made them look at it differently. We don't speak of it in any language most people would recognize. But we know each other when we meet. TSI Firmica. You stop running here. I did. If this story found something in you, if some part of what she chose felt like a decision you have been circling for a long time, there are other women here. Other stories. Other nights like this one. Subscribe so the next one finds you.